Mr. Umholtz.
Great. Thank you. Let's wiggle. Aloha, everyone. I'm going to share my screen now. Can everyone see my screen okay? I can't see you, so I'll need a verbal.
Yep, we can see it.
All right, so I'm going to get started. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to present today. Yes, we're going to be looking at coral bleaching and how it's connected to climate change. But first of all, yeah, my name is Justin Umholtz. I'm an educator at Moku Papapa Discovery Center. I'm wondering, go ahead and put in the chat box, how many of you have ever been to Moku Papapa Discovery Center in Hilo? It's a bit of a drive for you. I don't know how many of you have quick access to the chat box. Not too many. All right, so we are basically a discovery center, and our job is to tell a story about a very special part of Hawaii that I'm going to introduce to you. But first of all, whenever we're welcoming somebody into our space, we oli. And since we're all virtual, I'm hoping you don't mind if I oli just to set the space. This is one written to connect the main Hawaiian Islands where we live with the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. Puka mai ka lai kumu kahi la ea avelo ana I lehua la ea e vai aloha kamakani la ea o Hawaii loa ke alahula la ea I holani ke kuina I holani ku. Mahalo. And that oli is written specifically to honor the entire Hawaiian archipelago, from the island we live on, the youngest, to the very last Holani Ku, which I'll show you in just a second. What I wanted to show first is that there are actually marine protected areas across the United States, protected under NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and specifically as part of the National Marine Sanctuary System. So all of these different circles that you see and triangles are marine protected areas. And we're going to focus today way over here on the left with us in Hawaii. And there are two protected areas out here. Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whales National Marine Sanctuary. They have a home base on Maui, but actually there are protected waters all across the main Hawaiian Islands because those are special shallow protected areas where humpback whales will bring their calves to raise them. I'm sure you guys are aware of that. And Papahanaumokuakea. And Papahanaumokuakea is special because it's actually a marine national monument rather than a sanctuary. It was protected specifically by a president, actually President George W. Bush when he was president, and President Barack Obama expanded the boundaries to this huge hot dog bun shape you see. So all of this part of Hawaii is actually protected and is the largest permanently protected area in the entire planet. Really special place full of the older islands of Hawaii, the islands that have moved away from our hotspot and have since mostly eroded and sunk under the waves, except for tiny little islands, but have hundreds of thousands of acres of amazing coral reefs. And that's where we're going to focus today. Whoops. So something that I have learned, my co-teacher Malia Evans has taught me about, is the kumulipo. And while we're focusing on coral, I just want to acknowledge and start with the fact that in oral histories, and particularly in this oli, 2,000 plus lines oli called Ke Kumulipo, coral was seen as the center of and beginning of life. And so I'd just like you to take a second. I'm gonna, hopefully won't get an echo with my voice. I'm gonna play just the beginning part of it.
We can't hear it.
Oh, you can't. Shoot. Okay, well, it's embedded in the slide, so maybe that's the problem. Needless to say, you can find that online. Sorry, I don't get to use Slido or Zoom too often, so I'm not as familiar with it. So what you would be hearing is a man chanting, and early on, he's saying, Hanau ka uko ka ko'a ko'a, born is the coral polyp. And so from the Hawaiian perspective of the creation of the world, of the universe, from darkness, from lipo, from the deep blue darkness, which is much like the deep ocean, life evolved first as a simple coral polyp, and then eventually evolved into more and more complex life forms, including us. And what's amazing to me is this is basically an evolutionary theory. The theory of evolution that we learned from Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace is another evolutionary theory. So hundreds of years before they posited theirs, Hawaiian historians, or I'm sorry, Hawaiian kumu, masters of their particular study, were already kind of making their own scientific theories. And I think it's really important to recognize that there are many different worldviews, and each one has important information that we can combine to really deepen our knowledge. And that's exciting living here in Hawaii, because that's really an active part of scholarship here. So we're going to begin our lesson with that perspective that all of us are connected, and from this perspective, all of us are actually family, are born from the same place and must take care of each other. And so here's the Slido piece I was talking about. I'm going to stop sharing for a second and switch over, but if you guys can you see the link that I put into the chat? I just sent it again. What I'd like you to do is jump over to that link, and you should see in my screen right now the Slido poll. The question for you is, close your eyes and imagine yourself swimming in a coral reef. You guys are a lot closer to some of the beautiful coral reefs on this island. What do you see? So you can type in a word or a couple words, and we'll start to build a word cloud together to see what everybody's experiences are. When you think about our coral reefs here, what do you think about? What do you see? It may take a second to load up, but don't be shy. All right, here we go. It's starting to populate. Yeah, let's see. We're at 13 people have added, 15. Great. Keep it coming. We'll go a little longer. Different types of coral, seaweed, sea creatures, fish is huge, coral colors, turtles, eels. Yeah, lots of different life. Spear fishing. Yeah, we depend on the reef for food and for fun. I see a lot of different animals that you see there. Mr. Krabs. Yeah, yellow tang, Patrick. Yeah, we have a lot of SpongeBob fans out there. All right, so take another 15 seconds, and then I'm going to switch us over. But if you get inspired, you can add some as we go. I'm just going to switch back over to my slideshow. All right, so everybody take a look at that. These are your classmates' joined experiences. The bigger the picture, the word, the more people said that same word. Yeah, I'm also seeing some problems, plastic and junk, sunscreen, death. So it's a mix, isn't it? All right, I am going to stop sharing that one and share my slideshow again. Okay, can everybody see this image of a coral reef? I'm gonna assume so.
Yes,
okay.
We can see it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as the Kumulipo shared, coral reefs are the foundation of nearshore ecosystems in Hawaii. And you guys have obviously experienced your connection to it as well. About 70% of the coral reefs in the entire United States can be found in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. So it gives you a sense of just how vital and central coral reefs are here in Hawaii. But as some people were pointing out in the word cloud, coral reefs around the world are struggling to survive. And I'd like to ask you to put in the chat box, what have you guys heard about coral reefs being in trouble? Is that something that's familiar to you, or is that something that's more new to you? I'll give you a second because it looks like you got to walk up. Oh, familiar. Okay. Yeah. Ms. Wagel's familiar with this. The chemicals in sunscreen. Yeah, that's definitely new research that's pointing to that. Drought and erosion. Yep. Erosion and runoff. Corals are being bleached. Trash and sunscreen. Okay. So yeah, there are definitely some pieces you're familiar with. Those are great examples. And global warming and pollution. So we're going to kind of touch on all of that and really focus on climate change. Yeah, climate change equals bleaching. Exactly, that's a good one. Okay, so what is coral bleaching? Why does coral bleach? And that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at first. Is we're going to do a really simple coral biology look here. So this is a picture I took of some mound coral over at Waiuli at Richardson's here near Hilo. And can you see all of, I think I have a pointer, there we go. All of these little circles here, those are actually animals. Each one of those is a coral polyp. These are related, these are cnidarians, so they're related to jellyfish, they're related to sea anemones, and they live in colonies. So that whole cluster on the rock, that colorful crust is actually these tiny little animals clustered together in a colony. So anybody have a guess? You can, either Ms. Wagel can call on you if you raise your hand, or you could type in the chat box. What are all these little arms floating off of it? Anybody have a guess? Tentacles, yes, food reachers. Good job, Sarah. Tentacles, Mindy, yes. We got a bunch of answers. You are correct. And so these tentacles, they come in multiples of 6. That's how they feed. But in the daytime, we don't see that. We just see sort of colorful, crusty rocks. And that's because they also build a calcium carbonate shell. And they build these little, what they're called calyx, or calices in plural. And those are basically just protective shells that they kind of hide in during the day. But it's nighttime when feeding starts. And then they'll open up like a flower or sea anemone, and they'll be kind of floating their tentacles out and capturing small plankton that's being moved around in the currents. And what is incredible is all of this whole family of cnidarians have stinging cells, nematocysts. And so they can actually shoot little dart-like stingers out of those tentacles that help them capture and subdue prey to draw into that little mouth you see there. There is one other really important secret about coral polyps, and it's a relationship they have with something else. I'll give you a hint. It's something that gives them their vibrant colors. So I'm curious if anybody has an idea of what that special secret relationship might be. Has anybody ever heard of that? It's okay if it's totally new. Algae, you are right. So what is amazing is that coral polyps, the animal, and they build a shell, which is kind of a mineral, are also a plant in a way. They have a symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae. If it's easy to remember, you could say zooxanthellae. People pronounce it both ways. And they actually take the zooxanthellae into their bodies. You can see it here, and we'll go even more close up with a microscope. And all of these tiny microscopic algae are in their tissues and benefit from the shelter and some special nutrients that the coral polyp gives to them. But what does the zooxanthellae give to the coral? Anybody have any thoughts? What would a plant give to coral? I'll give you a hint. It's the same thing that maybe a tree would give, or grass. Yeah, photosynthesis. Very good. Exactly. So just like all of the algae, phytoplankton that's in the ocean, we actually depend on plants for our oxygen. And in this case, the photosynthesis that the zooxanthellae does, it gives almost all of it. If I remember correctly, it's over 80% of the carbohydrates of the food energy directly to the coral polyp. So instead of just kind of waving its arms and hunting at night and just getting whatever passes by, it's actually getting super loaded. It becomes kind of a superhero in a colorful costume, much more robust and able to spread and thrive. So that's what we want to see, is bright, colorful coral full of zooxanthellae. But here's what happens, and here's what you guys were kind of talking to me about, is with changes in ocean temperature and other stressors. So I saw in the chat box, we had other stressors like runoff or pollution, the sunscreen, overexposure to sunlight, the changing sea levels where we get really extreme tides that expose coral, litter, people stepping on the coral, all of those different things stress coral out. But it's the changing ocean temperature that is having the biggest global effect. And so this infographic that we have out is showing you, this is what a healthy coral looks like, what we looked at already. As the coral gets stressed, especially with heat, the zooxanthellae actually becomes toxic to the animal, to the coral polyp. And so the coral polyp starts expelling it out of its body. And so if you see coral that's kind of seems really faded, that's probably starting to get stressed out. It's lost some of its ability to get the extra energy with the zooxanthellae in its body. And then finally, we have bleach coral where all of the zooxanthellae is outside of the body. But always good to remember the coral is not dead at that point. What we are seeing is only the coral animal in its white skeleton, just like a white shell. So while coral is very stressed and vulnerable at that point, it's like if you were sick and run down, it's not dead yet. And that's something to always keep in mind. So let's dive into ocean temperature. And I want to show you, here's an example from one of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. This is beautiful lavender colored coral, but you can see these bigger areas here that have already bleached out, that are not dead yet, but are definitely under a lot of stress. But here's how you can tell if coral is dead. When algae starts to overgrow it and basically just use the coral skeleton as a substrate, as just a point to attach to and grow on, at that point we know the coral has died. And I do see a little bit of that in some of the beaches here in Hilo. I think on the side of the beaches you guys probably go in East Hawaii or West Hawaii, you probably see a lot more of this, unfortunately. And so let's look at why this is happening. So I'm sure you guys have heard of greenhouse gases. What do you think about what are greenhouse gases? Go ahead and type it in the chat box, or if you want, Ms. Wiggle, you can raise your hand and Ms. Wiggle will call on you. Yeah, carbon dioxide. Yep, methane also, yep. And there are some others as well, but we're gonna focus, methane's a big one. We hear a lot of articles about cow farts and all the off-gassing. Methane actually has a faster impact on, yeah, H2O is true as well, faster impact on the greenhouse effect, but we're gonna focus on carbon dioxide because as humans, we are creating a rampant excess of carbon dioxide through our actions, through our activities, burning fossil fuels and other things. And what happens is that those gases, they collect in the atmosphere and they act like a heat trapping blanket, which basically makes it harder for the heat energy of the sun's rays to reflect back out into space. And imagine yourself wrapped up in a blanket. The longer you're wrapped up in a blanket, the hotter and hotter that air around you is going to get. And that's what's happening to the Earth. So here is a graph which is super cool, maybe a little intimidating at first, but I'm going to walk you through it because it tells us a really neat story. So my friend Aidan Colton, who's a science technician up at Mauna Loa, we actually happen to live on the island where they observe and analyze or collect atmospheric gas data, analyze it and share it with the world. It's really important data for climate change. He gave me this graph and he was talking about what special story this up and down graph tells us. This is a normal part of our carbon cycle that we see. And so I'm going to see if we can figure this out together. We're basically seeing, oh, I should have said too, on the left-hand side, we're seeing parts per million. So the higher the number, the more carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere. The lower the number, the less. That's kind of the quick version here. And then on the bottom are the dates. We're only looking at about 5 years. So as you go into 2010, at the beginning of the year, it's really low. And then as you get higher, we basically have a one up cycle and down cycle for the year. And then it does it again and again. So what in the world could be causing that up and down every single year? I can give you a hint. Here in Hawaii, our seasons are really stable, isothermic. But in other parts of the world, because they're measuring not just here, but they're measuring the atmosphere in general, they have some really cold winters. So what would be affected by cold winters that uses CO2? Anybody want to take a guess? So fires is a separate thing, and that would definitely cause some problems. Trees, yes, and grasses and bushes and plants. Nice job. Yeah, well, and then the current travel, somebody said as well, is that's kind of a separate issue as well. So, there's a bunch of different contributors, but in a day-to-day life, whether humans are here or not, the earth breathes. And we are actually seeing a graph of the earth breathing. In the winter time, in areas that get really cold, the trees and all the plants go dormant. They really slow down their growth. They slow down their photosynthetic process or almost stop it entirely until it warms up again. And so at that time, they are not taking in carbon dioxide as part of their photosynthetic process. And so we should see at that point a much higher amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And then in the summertime, everything's green and lush and full of photosynthetic activity. And at that point, a lot more carbon dioxide is being drawn in by that plant life. So you're basically seeing 2 big breaths every single year. And so that's normal. We should be seeing that. But what we are also noticing is this upward trend. Even in just the 5 years, we're seeing every single year there's just a little more CO2 in the atmosphere. And so let's look at that. There's this, what is called the Keeling curve, this famous curve of carbon dioxide since humans have really got involved in the picture. Data has only been collected at Mauna Loa since about the late 50s, early 60s. And so what you're seeing here is, again, the earth breathing, see the up and down, but the curve itself, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has gone up dramatically, the steep curve. And right now we're around 415 parts per million. This is the new norm right here. And some people will say, well, the earth goes through cycles, climate goes through cycles, isn't just one of those natural cycles. And that's where we can actually look at older data. The cool thing is scientists are able to go and take ice core samples. And before that ice melted, it was water full of gas particles. And so they can date the ice and then look at what gases were trapped inside of it. And by doing that, we can go back 10,000 years. And we can see that the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere were only around 250 to 275 parts per million until, say, the last 100 years, the Industrial Revolution. You see this sharp spike. So that's excess or rampant carbon dioxide release, and that's what we're talking about. But I'm going to take you back even farther. Let's go back 800,000 years. And here we're going to see some pretty huge climate events because there are natural cycles. Look, we've seen a big jump in carbon dioxide levels every 10,000 years or 100,000 years. And that will make major changes to the world. But the difference is these are happening over a long period of time because, look at our scale. This is 100,000 years right here. And even small changes to our climate can have huge impacts on the life around us. So a 1 degree temperature could change the range of a certain animal or the ability of a plant to be in a certain area or last a certain part of the season, in which case it may or may not be available as food for another plant. So you know how the ecosystem is connected. So small changes can make really big differences to areas. Not uniformly, it's going to be different in every area. And that's what we're trying to figure out. But again, look at our curve. It shoots up to much higher levels than anything that we've ever found evidence for in the past. All right, the last graph of this I'm going to show you is from climate.gov, which is a great website for a lot of climate data. And so the first thing we just talked about was this rampant carbon dioxide that we're finding in the atmosphere. But how is it impacting the ocean? How is it impacting temperatures? And so as that carbon dioxide works as that heat trapping blanket, we are seeing the average global temperature. So again, it'll be different in different areas of the world, but the average total global temperature has gone up about 1 degree Celsius in the last 50, 60 years. What's happening and what's more impacting coral is that, how if you have a little kiddie swimming pool and it's a hot day, even though if the water is cold, if you leave it there long enough, the water starts to heat up. It's actually absorbing heat energy from the atmosphere, from the air, and trying to find a temperature balance. And so the surface, especially of that water, starts to heat up. And the ocean is basically the same thing. The ocean has been protecting us from these changes for decades as it absorbs more and more of this growing atmospheric energy. And unfortunately, what we're starting to see is that the ocean, that amount of energy and heat energy, the temperature of the ocean itself has been changing also in the last few decades, and the chemistry too, which is another conversation about ocean acidification. And so going back to corals, our job is to keep track of what's going on and to put our efforts into protecting these corals as much as possible. So something I would really encourage you guys to do, because there are some great universities here, Hilo and Manoa, that train you to be coral scientists. And you'll be out in the water actively studying the reefs. This woman here is running a transect as she does a survey. So this tape measure here is her transect line, and she's following it along, and at every certain mark, she's looking through her quadrat, or this PVC square here, and she's assessing something that, depending on what their study is about, usually it's maybe looking for coral bleaching or counting the number of fish in the area, or looking for disease. It can be all sorts of things that help them understand how that reef is doing. And then they can kind of apply it to the whole reef, because there's no way you could look at the whole reef, especially in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, which are huge, hundreds of thousands of acres of reef. And so that's our problem, is we're here, our job is to protect Papahanaumokuakea, and that is 1.5 million square kilometers. And most of it is underwater. And so we depend on satellites, and more scientists are using satellite imagery as a way to get a better idea of what's going on, so that then we can send money and people to go check out those really big problem areas. So this is kind of an overwhelming map, but when you're done when we're done here, you are going to have a super cool tool that will allow you to know where are the coral bleaching hotspots at any given time. You can look at your favorite beach and you can check it out all the way back to 1986, or check out and see what's happening today. So the first thing we want to look at is that this satellite is measuring sea surface temperature anomalies. So it's measuring the sea surface temperature of all of the world's ocean, and then it's figuring out the average for that area. And then it's looking for an anomaly, which basically just means, is it different than normal? Is it higher? Is it lower? That's because that's what we're worried about. Is it different than normal? And so down here is our legend, this long arrow here. And it's saying if there's 0, then we're not going to see any color at all. But if there's color, then we know that it's either colder than normal or it's hotter than normal by degrees Celsius. So I would like some in the chat box, go ahead and let's look at this blob here. That's off of South America and stretching all the way over to Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. What is going on in this blob? What can we tell about it? Is it normal? Go ahead and type in the chat box. Yeah, colder. By how much? Go ahead and type how many degrees. Yeah, it's colder. Use the color chart to tell. Yeah, -1, -2. Exactly. Yeah, so see, you're getting it. So, okay, so this area, and again, this is just one day. We're only looking at January 27th, 2021. On that day, this area was a little bit colder than normal. So if it's just a day or two, no big deal. We're all really resilient. Life can handle small changes, especially if they don't stick around. So let's move to Hawaii. Here's the Hawaiian archipelago right here. Here we are, Hawaii Island. Only looking at Hawaii Island, what's going on in the ocean? Type it in the chat box. It's hotter, yep. Yeah, by a degree or so, 1 degree warmer, exactly. So that's no big deal. Not too worried about it. Yeah, maybe parts are up to 2 degrees. But let's look at the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. So if you can see my pointer, from here all the way out to about there, that's the northwestern. So what's going on out in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands? Yeah, +3 or 4 degrees Celsius. That is significant. It's 3 to 4 degrees hotter than normal. And that is something I would be concerned about if it lasted. Again, we can, life can handle changes like that for a little bit of time. And so that is what this next graph is going to talk about with us. Again, when I first saw this, I was so overwhelmed because there's so much going on, but I'm going to walk you through it. And it's actually really cool because instead of just looking at the whole world, we can just look at parts of Hawaii. So right now, we're looking at the main Hawaiian Islands. We're looking at bleach alerts, and we're looking at September 15th, 2020. And so instead of just looking at one day's anomaly, what we're looking at now is this a problem that's lasted a long time? And so the longer that the sea surface temperatures are hotter than normal, the more stress is going to be on the coral. And so what scientists do is they measure what we call degree heating weeks. How many weeks has the temperature of the ocean been hotter than normal by 1 degree Celsius? And so if it's no problem, it doesn't last long, it's going to be light blue, no stress. If it's yellow, then we need to start paying attention because it means it's been about a week or two that it's been a little bit warmer than normal. You get the warning, and that's when we really stand up and pay attention because it's been probably 3 weeks at that point. Alert level 1 is telling us there is likely coral bleaching happening. And there's been more than from 4 to 8 weeks, 4 to 8 degree heating weeks. And when we get to this dark red alert level 2, it means that there's probably mortality, coral death, because the water has been above normal for more than 8 degree heating weeks. So that's what we really don't like to see. And so let's practice. There's 4 maps here. The one that you want to look at first is here, the upper left, is the current data. And then they forecast out 4 weeks, 8 weeks, and 12 weeks. So that if we were looking like at today's, then we would be able to kind of get a sense of, is it going to go away? Is it going to stick around? What should we do? This is really important for managers of these protected areas. Okay, so let's start with the current. What is happening around Hawaii? Is there anything we need to worry about? Go ahead and type in the chat box. Look at the color and then compare it to that gauge. Yeah, you can see bleaching, watch, and warning exactly. So around the Hawaiian Islands here, I'm not really worried. There's a watch, so we should start perking up our attention. The warning, though, is there's a buildup of heat up north. So what's going to happen to that is what we need to kind of keep an eye on. And that's where we can start looking ahead. So let's look at the forecast, 1 to 4 weeks out. What do you see that is happening? Yeah, it's getting worse. There is an alert, a warning. So this is what I think is really important, and what I like these individual maps is that you can look at more specific areas. If we were zoomed out, we would probably only see that there's a watch and a warning. But you can see up here that there is at least 4 weeks, 4 degree heating weeks built up in the north. And that would be something I'd be worried about. Around the Hawaiian Islands, we're not too worried yet. We're in a warning stage around Maui Nui and out toward Niihau and up by you guys on kind of Kohala area. But you can see the whole parts of the island are also not having any trouble really. Okay, let's move to week 5 through 8. What do you see happening there? Alert level 2 in some places. Warning and alert levels. Yep. Yikes. Yikes indeed. Yeah, so you're seeing this huge wave of built up warm temperatures that have lasted up here for 4 to 8 weeks, and in this upper area, over 8 weeks, degree heating weeks. So that area is, luckily, it's north of us. So it's not hitting Hawaii yet, Hawaii reefs, but it looks like it's moving toward us. And you can see this little dot off of East Maui is actually already at alert level 1. So they may be seeing some bleaching. And so that's really important because out of the entire Hawaiian Islands, that would be the area to send your scientists and put money toward as far as figuring out what's going on. So you see how this helps us make really good decisions with the limited resources that we have. And luckily, as we're seeing it in weeks 9 through 12, we're seeing mostly that the temperatures have dropped dramatically. But there are still some areas around East Maui, it looks like, that we would want to work, checking out. So they really likely we're dealing with some bleaching issues on the beaches there, in the coral reef there. Everybody with me so far? We're going to go one step deeper. And again, this is a lot of visual information, but isn't it incredible that a satellite is able to sample the temperatures of the surface of the Earth, and then we can take that information and turn it into these amazing tools that any of us can access on the internet at Coral Reef Watch and have so much information. That's what I love about today's technology, is that it's really putting more information in our fingertips, even if we're not like the technical scientists. And so I want you to look at this graph below, because we're only looking at one specific date and some forecasting. Down here is really cool because you can actually see what's been happening at your favorite reefs for years, all the way back to 1986 is where they have data for. And so you can't see it in my slide, but just below this graph on the left is a little box, a drop-down menu where you can choose a 2-year date range. So right now it's on 2019 and 2020. And what we're seeing in 2020 is that nothing really happened. There was a warning and a little watch right here. And we know that there was actually a little bit of alert level 1, but it was so small that it didn't really show up in this big picture graph. But if we go back to 2019, oh my goodness, you can see that the main Hawaiian Islands by August, we're in a watch. By it looks like mid-August, had already hit 4-degree heating weeks, which is this dotted line here. And we were in alert level 1, so bleaching likely. And then by mid-September, early October, it looks like, or sorry, late September, early October, we were in alert level 2, and it lasted the whole month until November. And that means it had been above 4-degree heating weeks. Looks like it went almost to 15-degree heating weeks probably. And then you can see quickly that the temperatures dropped off. And so again, we see it's that August, September, October, those are the danger months. Those are when the summer temperatures have really built up heat in the ocean. So this doesn't tell us a lot about where. Like, I like these maps up here because you can actually see, is my beach impacted by that, where I like to go? And so let's actually go back to this. But this time we're going to change the dates up here to fit October 2019. And so see here, I went to October 8th, 2019, and oh my goodness, look at this, look at these maps. And since we're going into the past, we don't worry about the forecasts here. Let's just look at what the actual day looked like. And this is what is really important, is the more times that corals are under alert level 1 and 2, the accumulative is the damage. So if I had like a big sickness and then I got better and I had time to recover and get strong, then that's part of my life. It probably hurt a lot, but I can move on and recover. But if it's happening to me every year, then I'm going to get weaker and weaker and very likely die. And that's what we're seeing with some coral areas that are getting hit the hardest. And unfortunately, West Hawaii has seen really heavy coral bleaching since about 2002. Not every year, but enough years that it's getting more and more frequent. And you can see Maui Nui, the shallow areas, alert levels 1 and 2. But it doesn't hit everything the same. And you can see Kauai and Niihau didn't deal with the same issues, at least on that particular day. And so that is as deep as we're going to go here. But let me quickly give you that link. coralreefwatch.noaa.gov will take you to their main page. And then these gauges for the main Hawaiian Islands is the rest of that pathway. Oops, there we go. But I have one more. I don't want to leave you with this it's a cool tool, but it's also a little depressing what we looked at. So let's go a little farther and look at what we can do about this. And so this is another infographic that I'll share the link to, you can download. But this talks about how climate change, not just the warming ocean and thermal stress, but but other things are all building up together to change our ocean. And it's important for us to understand what's happening so that we can make the best decisions to support as much healthy life as possible, and also for us as humans to adapt to it. But the biggest thing that, global leaders are recognizing, although it's really hard to make change, is that we need to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide, this rampant CO2 that we're emitting into the atmosphere. We're going to see climate change. It's already happening. It's already having impacts, and it's a slow process to change. But the very first thing we need to do is reduce our carbon footprint. And so, we can push our leaders to continue to do that, and we can also do it ourselves. We can make individual choices that will help reduce our personal carbon footprint. And you can actually go to EPA.gov, the Environmental Protection Agency, or just type in a search for carbon footprint calculator, and you can actually write in what your life is like, and it will help you figure out, what is my carbon footprint? Where are places where I can make changes that would make a difference? And these individual choices really do change things, because it also puts pressure on our stores and commercial leaders, as well as our politicians, to make these bigger, harder decisions. But the thing, because we all live around reefs, the thing I want to really hit is, if we can keep our reefs as healthy as possible, as less stress from other things, they're more resilient and more able to handle the changes that are happening from climate change. And so you can see on the bottom right, there are some simple things that we can all do. The big one is reducing pollution that's running off into our reefs, both chemical pollution, but also sediment pollution. So if there's, somebody mentioned it earlier, if there's a lot of erosion, exposed soil, our heavy rains are going to wash it right out into the reefs. And that actually covers the reefs, and keeps them from being able to actually, photosynthesize and survive. We can protect the fisheries on the reef, so that the balance of different fishes can kind of keep algae off the reef and keep the overall ecosystem healthy. And of course, not stepping on it and all those kind of basic things, keeping it clean. So I really encourage you just to take a deeper look at what each of us individually can do to keep our reefs strong. There actually are some citizen science bleaching reporting organizations. I think through Coral Reef Ecology, I'll write that in here. Ecology.org. Oops, sorry, I'm on the Hawaiian alphabet, so keyboard, it did something weird. So you can actually, they have a reporting tool. So if you're swimming at your favorite reef and you see the bleaching, you can actually report it and help them know where to focus their efforts. So there's tons of stuff that we individually can do in addition to these bigger issues. So thanks, guys. We went really deep with all of that. So I appreciate you sticking with me. And yeah, it's water. The land and ocean are connected. So yeah, that's a very good point in the chat box. Is there anything that folks wanted to ask me or add to the conversation? I'm going to double check my notes and see if I didn't forget to share anything with you. Oh, yes. Here is the infographic that I just showed you. And for those of you who want a little bit of a lighter look, my friend Michael, who's the aquarist here, and I put together a video swimming the reef, and it goes over some of the basic kind of meeting some of the life that lives on the reef here on Hilo's side, and talks a little bit more about coral bleaching, but it's a lot lighter than what we just did. You can share it with your younger friends and brothers and sisters. All right, well, that does it. It looks like I'm almost out of time, but does anyone have any questions? My pleasure. We're too big for the coral polyps. Sorry about that. To affect us, although there are certainly some jellyfish that would. Yeah, my pleasure. And we hope to be able to welcome you all back to Moku Papapa Discovery Center. We're still closed, but we kind of have to wait till our national leaders give us permission to reopen, but we're working on it. Oh yeah, stop share. The most beautiful reefs to dive. You know, honestly, my wife is a coral biologist or marine biologist, and she says that at this point, a lot of the West Hawaii reefs have really taken a beating in the last 5 years. So here in East Hawaii, we have some of the healthiest reef on this island. But overall, in the whole world, I'm not really sure. Papahana mokuakea, if you can get on a science team or somehow finagle your way into a permit to get out there, those are still in pretty good condition. They're really amazing. Oh, and I should, of course, with my last piece, I'll share our website. We're working on improving our website, but in the meantime, you can find all kinds of information on the northwestern Hawaiian Islands here.
Okay, thank you, Justin, so much for presenting to us today. It was so nice to have you on Zoom.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And this was the first time I just created this presentation. So if you guys have any feedback, I would not be offended. I want to make this as interesting and clear as possible for you. So feel free to pass any feedback on to Ms. Wiggle, and I would love it. I want to make this as good as possible for you. Thank you, everyone. Aloha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know how. I don't know